The camera opens in silence, only the soft hum of an old film reel spinning in the dark. Her face appears, Ingrid Bergman, the woman once worshipped as the symbol of purity, intellect, and grace. For decades, the world believed she belonged entirely to light. But even the purest light casts a shadow. Decades after her death, an unopened envelope surfaced, its paper yellowed, her handwriting fragile. Inside was a letter that would rewrite everything Hollywood thought it knew. It spoke of one man, Gregory Peck, and of nights when rain fell like confession, when the queen of innocence surrendered to a love she could never claim. They called it a rumor. They were wrong. Because hidden between reels of Spellbound lay a story of passion, guilt, and the unbearable beauty of what could never be. A secret love that survived the cameras, the scandal, and even time itself. Stay until the end. The truth behind this legend may surprise you. The applause seemed endless. Spotlights melted into gold as Ingrid Bergman stepped onto the stage, her smile calm, her posture flawless. Hollywood called her the ideal woman, a face without scandal, a voice without vanity, a star who made goodness glamorous. From Casablanca to Gaslight, every frame carried the illusion of serenity. People believed she was untouched by desire, that her beauty came from something higher, cleaner, almost divine. And yet, beneath the applause, something restless began to stir. Each triumph felt strangely hollow, as if the standing ovations were echoes in a cathedral she no longer believed in. She had played women who were strong, patient, forgiving. But who was she when the cameras stopped? At home, the quiet felt heavy. Her husband, Dr. Peter Lindstrom, spoke in the language of science, precise, measured, safe. Ingrid admired him, but she lived on a different frequency, one made of dreams and shadows. She wanted chaos, warmth, imperfection, something that felt alive. The perfection the world adored had become her cage. When Alfred Hitchcock's Proposal arrived, a psychological drama about amnesia and love, produced by David O. Selznick, she read the script and frowned. "It's absurd," she told them. Love born from dreams? A man who doesn't know his own name? She refused, twice. But fate has a peculiar sense of timing. Hitchcock, half smiling, said only one thing before leaving her dressing room. "You'll change your mind after you meet him." Those words lingered like perfume in the air. Ingrid returned to her mirror that night, wiping away the last trace of makeup. The reflection stared back, a woman every magazine called perfect, yet one who barely recognized herself. Behind the crystal blue eyes, there was fatigue, curiosity, and something dangerous, a yearning she could no longer name. Outside, Los Angeles slept under a quiet sky. Inside, she whispered to her own reflection, "Maybe perfection isn't what I was meant for." And as she turned off the light, she couldn't know that the next morning, the day she would meet Gregory Peck, her carefully built image of purity would begin to crack forever. The studio smelled faintly of dust, cigarette smoke, and fresh paint, the scent of new beginnings disguised as routine. Ingrid Bergman arrived late that afternoon, still intending to decline the project once and for all. She had made up her mind. Spellbound was not for her. The story seemed strange, almost reckless. A psychiatrist who falls in love with a man who has lost his memory. It was absurd, she told herself again. She would read a few lines, smile politely, and go home. Then the door opened. Gregory Peck stepped inside. Tall, understated, impossibly calm. His eyes were the color of the sea before a storm. Blue, steady, searching. He said almost nothing. "Good afternoon, Miss Sweden." The room fell quiet. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to stop. When they began reading the scene together, Peck's voice trembled at first, low, careful, deliberate. "I don't know who I am," he said, "but I know that I love you." Something in his tone pierced through the air like a thread of electricity. Ingrid froze. Her pulse quickened, but her voice softened. The words she had once mocked in the script suddenly felt alive. Dangerous. Almost prophetic. From a corner, Alfred Hitchcock watched them silently, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He cleared his throat, then smiled faintly. There was no need to say a word. He had seen enough. When the test scene ended, the two actors remained still. Their eyes lingered, 1 second too long, perhaps 2. Neither spoke. The silence was dense, magnetic, filled with questions neither dared to ask. Later that night, Ingrid called Hitchcock. Her voice was calm, but her hand trembled as she held the receiver. "I'll do it," she said simply. Hitchcock only chuckled. "I told you you'd change your mind." She hung up and stood by the window for a long time, staring at the streetlights flickering below. She didn't understand what had happened, only that something had shifted inside her. It wasn't about the film anymore. It was about the man with the storm-colored eyes and the strange feeling that her carefully ordered world was about to unravel. In that silence, something irreversible had begun. Rain was falling outside the soundstage, steady and cold, the kind of rain that blurs the world into gray. Inside, under the blinding studio lights, Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck were asked to repeat a simple scene. A hand, a glance, a pause too long. Hitchcock watched them through the lens and murmured, "Hold him until she believes you're not the patient." The camera rolled. Peck reached for her hand, warm, trembling, real. In that instant, something inside her broke. When the director finally called cut, neither of them moved. The scene had ended, but their gaze remained. Later that night, Ingrid sat alone in her dressing room and wrote in her diary, "My God, I've gone mad." She tried to reason with herself. She was married. She reminded her heart. Married to Dr. Peter Lindstrom, the man who had once steadied her when Hollywood felt unreal. But now every evening she returned home to a house filled with silence, the ticking clock louder than conversation. Peter's voice, once comforting, had turned clinical. He spoke of patience and research. She answered with nods and polite smiles. Between them stretched a distance no bridge could cross. Then came the note. 3 words, handwritten in calm, confident strokes. Hotel Bear, 11 p.m. She read it again and again, until the letters blurred. When the clock struck 10:50, she was already in her coat, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Outside, the rain followed her like a witness. Gregory was waiting in the dim room on the 3rd floor, a small bouquet of white lilies trembling in his hands. "The only flower that makes me believe in gentleness," she had once told him. He remembered. No grand speeches, no rehearsed lines, only silence and the scent of rain. She said, "You're afraid people will see." He whispered back, "I'm more afraid of not seeing you." When he kissed her, it wasn't tender. It was desperate, raw, the meeting of 2 lonely souls defying their own promises. Rain slid down their faces, erasing the border between guilt and desire. And yet, beneath the heat of that forbidden moment, fear coiled quietly. Because no matter how fiercely they loved in secret, dawn would still come. And with it, the reminder that purity, once shattered, can never be restored. The rain would stop, but the guilt would never wash away. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Ingrid returned home from the studio, still carrying the faint scent of rain and lilies on her coat. On the kitchen table lay a large envelope tied neatly with a red string. No name, no return address. She hesitated, then untied it. Dozens of photographs spilled onto the floor. Her breath caught. There she was, smiling at Gregory in a cafe near Beverly Hills, stepping into a car under a dim streetlight, walking through the hallway of the Bear Hotel. Moments that should never have existed beyond memory now stared back in brutal clarity. Across one photo, written in thick black ink, were 5 words that froze her blood. Hollywood always has eyes. The room tilted. Her hands trembled as she gathered the pictures, heart hammering with dread. She waited for the next move, a phone call, a demand, a headline. None came. No blackmail, no whispers in the press, only silence. And silence, she soon realized, was more terrifying than exposure. It pressed against her chest, day after day, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Every sound, the creak of the stairs, the ring of the phone, became a threat. Every stranger's glance, an accusation. On set, she forced herself to smile, to become again the woman the world adored. But each time the director called action, her eyes flickered toward Gregory, and for a heartbeat, all the fear dissolved. He would sometimes brush her hand between takes, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. But when the cameras stopped, distance returned. That night, she sat by the window, unable to sleep. The city lights below looked like scattered embers, cold, unreachable. She imagined the anonymous watcher out there waiting, a journalist, a rival, or simply fate punishing her for wanting too much. The guilt grew heavier than the fear. She could bear scandal, but not the thought of destroying the man she loved. If the story ever broke, he would lose everything. Somewhere beyond the dark, a clock struck midnight. Ingrid whispered to the silence, "Please, let this end." The ticking stopped, and for a long, breathless moment, the entire world seemed to listen back. Which hurts more, to be seen or to keep pretending? The wind outside howled against the hotel windows, carrying the faint scent of rain that never quite left their story. Inside, the room was dim, 2 shadows, 2 people pretending the world beyond those walls didn't exist. Gregory Peck reached for her first, the way he always did, gentle, unsure, desperate to make time pause. "Ingrid," he whispered, "we can still leave it all behind." But she didn't answer. She had already decided. Her voice was soft when it finally came, breaking the silence like a quiet confession. "Gregory, we're living in a dream that isn't real." He froze, his hand still hovering near hers. A long pause, only the ticking of the clock between them. Then, barely audible, she added, "It's time to wake up." He shook his head slowly, eyes clouded with disbelief. "Don't say that," he murmured. "We're not pretending. Not anymore." But she stepped back, her body trembling as if she were fighting the air itself. All her strength went into holding the tears back. He reached out once more, but she turned away. Hitchcock once said every love story ends in a single shot. the moment the audience realizes it's already over. For them, this was that shot. A silent frame of two souls bound by what they could never have. When she finally opened the door, cold air swept in. Peck's voice broke behind her. "I love you," he said, words small but heavy, hanging in the half-light. "I always will, even when this dream is gone." She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she'd never find the courage to leave. Instead, she smiled faintly, a smile that held love, sorrow, and farewell all at once. Then she stepped into the corridor, and the door closed with a soft, final click. He stood motionless, surrounded by her perfume and the sound of rain against the glass. He didn't drink, didn't cry. He just stared at the door, as if willing it to open again. But it didn't, and that was how their story ended. Not with a scandal, not with anger, but with a silence so profound it felt like grief itself. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones spoken without a single tear. Only the echo of what love could have been. After Spellbound, life moved forward. At least, that's what the world believed. The cameras followed Ingrid Bergman from one dazzling premiere to another, but inside she carried a silence no applause could reach. The affair with Gregory Peck had ended, yet its shadow lingered in every role, every glance, every quiet night alone. She told herself she was healed, that duty and work would mend what passion had undone. But healing and forgetting are not the same thing. Peter Lindstrom, the husband she had once called her anchor, became a stranger she could no longer speak to. He lived by logic. She survived by feeling. Their dinners turned into brief exchanges between two polite ghosts. When the divorce finally came, she didn't cry. She had already said her real goodbye years earlier in that rain-soaked hotel room. Then, as if destiny refused to let her rest, another storm arrived. In Italy, she met Roberto Rossellini, a filmmaker wild with vision and defiance. Their connection was instant, volcanic. Both were married, both already broken in different ways. Yet together they ignited scandal that would shake the world. When news spread that Ingrid was pregnant with Rossellini's child, Hollywood erupted. The nation that once crowned her a goddess now branded her a sinner. She was banished from the silver screen, denounced in Congress, exiled by the very industry she had made luminous. But for a time she didn't care. She followed love, fierce, reckless, and real. In Italy, she gave birth to Roberto and twin daughters, Isabella and Ossa. The films she made with Rossellini, Stromboli, Journey to Italy, were raw, uncomfortable, and years ahead of their time. They were masterpieces born from pain. Yet even storms burn out. Rossellini's genius turned possessive, his admiration into control. By 1957, their marriage crumbled beneath the weight of pride and exhaustion. And then, unexpectedly, came calm. Lars Schmidt, a quiet Swedish producer, entered her life, not as a savior, but as a friend who understood silence. With him, she rediscovered simplicity, the peace of shared mornings and unspoken respect. They married in 1958 and remained companions for nearly 2 decades. Two souls who no longer needed to prove anything to the world. Fame had given her crowns, and exile had stripped them away. But somewhere between both, Ingrid Bergman learned what it meant simply to be human. She lived many lives, but one heart never healed. Decades passed. The world remembered Ingrid Bergman as a legend restored, the fallen star who rose again, The woman who won her place back with Anastasia and conquered the stage until her final breath. But one story never faded, even when time tried to bury it. It lived quietly in rumors and whispers, the story of her and Gregory Peck. Then, long after her death, a private letter was found among her personal papers. The handwriting delicate, the ink almost faded. The envelope bore no address, only a single word: unsent. Inside lay the truth she had never dared to speak aloud. We told ourselves it was only acting, she wrote, that what we felt was part of the film. But that was a lie. When I looked into his eyes, I forgot everything else. That frightened me more than anything. When news of the letter surfaced, Hollywood fell silent. It was no longer a rumor or a fantasy. It was confession. A love not scripted, not staged, real, imperfect, human. Gregory Peck, then in his 70s, received a copy from a close friend of Bergman's estate. He read it alone in his small study in California, surrounded by photographs from his long career. Witnesses said he read the page once, then again, his hands trembling. Tears blurred the lines before he reached the end. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness. It offered gratitude. I have never stopped being thankful for the kindness he showed me. Some loves do not fade. They simply change shape. In 1978, during an interview, a journalist asked Gregory about those rumors from Spellbound. For the first time, he didn't deny them. "All I can say," he said softly, "is that I truly loved her. And I think I should leave it at that." The studio audience fell completely still. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was history, finally told through trembling honesty. After the interview, Peck lingered on stage long after everyone had left. Someone who passed by later swore they saw him looking at a framed photo of Ingrid, whispering almost to himself, "If I could go back to that day, I'd still kiss her. But this time, I wouldn't let go." The world never heard him say her name again. But the silence that followed spoke louder than words. London, August 29th, 1982. The city slept beneath a soft, endless rain, the kind that seems to mourn without sound. Inside a small apartment on Cheney Walk, a single light still burned. Ingrid Bergman was turning 67 that night, her body fragile but her eyes still carrying that quiet flame the world had fallen in love with. Around her were only a few trusted souls: her former husband, Lars Schmidt, her daughter Isabella, and 2 dear friends. They had brought champagne and laughter, pretending it was just another birthday. Ingrid, propped up on pillows, smiled through the exhaustion. She lifted her glass and said softly, "Let's celebrate what's left of the light." The others laughed gently, unaware that she was already saying goodbye. On the small bedside table lay her favorite book, The Little Prince, worn, underlined, folded at the last chapter. Hours later, when the room grew quiet, she asked Lars to open it and read aloud. He reached the line, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." Her lips curved in a faint smile. The clock struck midnight. Her breathing slowed, each inhale shallower than the last. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Lars held her hand, the same hand that had once clutched an Oscar, that had reached for lovers and roles and dreams. He felt her fingers tighten one final time. Then, just as he thought she had slipped away, she opened her eyes once more. Her gaze seemed distant, almost luminous. She whispered something so quiet that only he could hear. Later, when asked, Lars would repeat it with a trembling voice. She said, "I still think of him." No one asked who him was. They didn't need to. Lars knew the name that lingered unspoken. The man with storm-blue eyes. The one she had carried inside her heart for nearly 40 years. When her breathing stopped, the rain also ceased, as if the city itself paused to honor her exit. Outside the window, a single star appeared through the gray, faint yet unwavering. It was said that in that moment, a star named Ingrid Bergman fell across the London sky. Brilliant, silent, eternal. Love had not saved her, but it had outlived her. Time has a strange mercy. It blurs the pain, softens the edges, and leaves behind only what was true. For Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck, truth was never about possession or permanence. It was about the quiet certainty that, for a moment, two lives had met exactly as they were meant to. And the echo of that meeting would last far longer than their years. After her passing, journalists wrote about her awards, her films, her legacy. They praised the discipline, the grace, the professionalism. But none of them could explain the tenderness in her final whisper, or why Gregory Peck, even in old age, kept her photograph on his study wall. Some loves don't end. They simply stop taking up space in the world and begin living inside us instead. Cinema remembered them differently. The doctor and the patient in Spellbound, frozen in black and white eternity, eyes locked as if the real could keep them together forever. Audiences still watch that scene, unaware they are witnessing something real. Two hearts breaking in real time behind the illusion of art. The camera captured what words could not. The electricity of forbidden feeling and the grief of knowing it cannot last. Ingrid's letter, now preserved in an archive, has become more than a confession. It is a reminder that even legends bleed quietly. That love, in its purest form, is not about winning or keeping, but about being changed. She once wrote, "Some loves do not fade, they simply change shape." Perhaps that is all any of us can hope for, to be remembered not for our perfection, but for the courage to love at all. And so their story endures, not as scandal, but as testament. A love born in light, tested in secrecy, and sealed in silence. Every time the rain falls softly against a window, every time Spellbound flickers on a screen somewhere, the air seems to tremble with her final words. I still think of him. Because true love doesn't need to last forever, only deep enough never to fade. If you felt something move quietly inside you tonight, stay. There are more forgotten hearts, more hidden letters, waiting to be heard in the dim light of memory. Let's keep their stories alive, together in this small corner of time.